So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the last session of this talk. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate that this session is all that is standing between you and the social event. I will try not to go over time. I managed very well this morning on this same stage, so should be doable. Let's have a quick show of hands, and I hope no hand will ever go up. Is there a person in this room who doesn't know what WAC is? Or there was a hint in the session title that it means Windows Admin Center. So does any one of you not know what Windows Admin Center is? Okay, great. Let's up the ante a bit. Does any one of you not know that there are two deployment modes in Windows Admin Center? Okay, we'll talk about that in due times. Does any one of you not know what RBAC is? Okay, so we are all prepared. So we can start by extending our heartfelt thanks to our sponsors, one of whom just so happens to be my employer. I'm Evgeny. I come from Berlin. Senior Solutions Architect at Sampris, Microsoft MVP for Cloud and Data Center Management, but really probably for PowerShell. Although I did do some Windows Admin Center and Hyper-V and SDC work in the past. I run 3 Windows-themed user groups in Berlin. The Windows Server user group that I inherited from Flo Klaffenbach, who went to work for Microsoft. The PowerShell user group Berlin, obviously, and the Exchange server user group that I run together with Thomas Stensitsky. So if you're interested, hit me up and or just search in meetup.com. They are all published there. I spoke at various events over time, 3 or 4 times at the PSConf, this year at the summit for the first time, different regional events, PS Day UK, which was great, and so on and so forth. So, what shall we do in this session? I will extend a belated declaration of love, not to you. My love for the community, especially for the PowerShell community, is eternal and undying. It does not need a separate declaration. Some wishful thinking, what we would like to be there. A peek under the hood, which will quickly evolve into a peek down the rabbit hole. And we will map out our way forward to outfitting WAC with RBAC. We all know what those are. So, my love for web-based systems management is not new. I actually fell in love with the concept in the mid-90s after figuring out how server, client, AJAX, and HTTP exchange works. And for me, it was a relatively clear concept even back then that this would be the way to go to manage everything, at least so far as people are visual beings. This love mostly remained platonic because I never considered a career of a software developer for myself, or thinking I was too way behind the curve already in the 90s. I did study programming in school and in university for a bit in languages many people would not even know how to spell today, like Fortran and Modular 2 and PL1 and things of that nature. But again, in the 90s, I didn't really think programming was for me until PowerShell came along. PowerShell was what brought me back into coding, actually. But I now work in software, and I do not mean my employer's products when I say that, but looking at some of the software products that graced the world since the 90s, I would have probably done just fine as programmer as well. And a whack. I wished Microsoft, many of you did as well, of course, Microsoft delivered. It's a web-based management portal in the Azure portal design we all love, or we all had to learn to love, depending where everybody's coming from. It can manage servers, clusters, and workstations out of the box, and other sorts of systems being extended. We will look at how that works. Extensible in functionality in multiple dimensions. We will look at that, but there are several problems with it. The administration of the WAC itself is, for many organizations I've spoken to in the course of my career and WAC's existence, is not granular enough. The management of server connections may not be granular enough, because if an administrator creates a shared connection in the WAC, it's visible to everyone who is able to log on, which is by default everybody who is able to authenticate. That could be restricted to a group or a set of groups, but by default, every authenticated user can connect to WAC and see all the servers that administrators put in there as shared connections. That could not be what organizations are envisioning. And the access to the registered targets, be it shared or personal, is also not granular enough, because under the hood it's governed by the default GI endpoint, Microsoft.PowerShell, which has these permissions. So system access, that is not very relevant for WAC, but administrators have full access. That's why they are administrators. And remote management users, those are also allowed to access Microsoft PowerShell, and that is all. Remote management users who do not have administrative rights on the local system will be filtered out gracefully by WAC, by the way. They get a nice verbose warning message instead of not nice and not very human readable error message. This is good. This has been taken care of, which leaves only the local administrators being able to access a remote system through the WAC. This is not really what organizations want to do. So, what is there? What can we work with to remediate those things? I think there are 1,000 blog posts and articles describing what WAC is. And if you read any of those, it says it's a web portal hosted on a machine, and you log on and connect to a remote system. And if you do that, it runs PowerShell under the hood, right? That's all that has been written so far, with very, very few exceptions. And this is sort of like what you and me and everybody else here at the conference would probably be able to hack together using like PodiWeb or Universal Dashboard or whatever. Right? Wrong. This is a high-level representation of what the public thinks WAC is. In reality, we have multiple components within the WAC, and those have their own quirks and idiosyncrasies. So the main logic of WAC sits on the machine where WAC is installed, which consists of two parts. The first one is the gateway. This is the part that facilitates the connections to the systems we want to manage using WAC. And the second one is the web server. And this web server is using the cutting edge modern technology that all cool kids and kidesses use to create modern, portable, highly scalable, bullshit bingo, web applications, which is Node.js. And Node.js means, as a rule, it's TypeScript after the hood, but it gets worse, because to facilitate all that cool, nice-looking interface. They use Angular framework to bind all that together. Anyone here familiar with Angular? And I don't ask about knowing that it exists, but knowing how to write Angular applications. Right, neither am I. So this is the web server. This is the part we get to see this Angular application on top of a Node.js workstation running in a web server process. This is what we see if we connect or when we connect using our browser to this interface. On the other side, towards the systems we want to manage, there is a gateway, and the gateway is a native application in .NET, which is extensible by many parts. So, out of the box, it's capable of PS remoting over WinRM, and it's also capable out of the box of doing WMI. There are WAC tools that do not use PowerShell towards the remote systems. They only use WMI. DHCP is one example, but DHCP PowerShell commandlets also do not use any sort of DCOM or different remoting. They also just use WMI. You can see that quite easily if you just look at the objects that they return. Those are the original WMI objects from the DHCP namespace, right? So this gateway out of the box has two connectors, WMI, or they are called plugins actually, WMI and PS remoting. And this is the first dimension of extensibility of WAC. We can create our own gateway plugins. And this is something that all third parties that created WAC extensions ended up doing, because they do not connect to WMI. They do not connect to Windows Server at all. They connect to hardware. They connect to storage. They connect to systems using some, REST API protocols. So they end up writing their own connector that wraps their own API, which they know like the back of their hand, because they govern that as well. And this allows this sort of extensibility. We could absolutely imagine, for example, having an LDAP API in there. Right? There is an Active Directory extension in WAC, but this Active Directory extension, in my opinion, is a step in the wrong direction, because WAC is server-centric. And AD is a distributed application, very highly so. So making AD management dependent on the server you're connecting to is not the right way to handle this. The right way would be a connector that speaks native LDAP, and after proper authentication, it would allow you to query and even modify your Active Directory, regardless of what server or servers you are talking to at the moment. For example, in a forest with multiple domains, it does matter which domain controller you're connecting to if you want to manage AD with WAC, right? So, the second area of extensibility is what they call solutions. And this is where you find all these third parties. So if you go to the portal, log on, and then you go here to all connections, then out of the box you get this drop down: server management, cluster management, and computer management. I mean, it's called server manager and cluster manager, but computer management. But Microsoft were never consistent, right, in their naming. And then there are the third-party extensions, and these are the guys that do not necessarily follow the pattern that WAC defines for these three built-in sort of solutions. And these solutions are also bound to these two protocols. So if you address something using the server manager solution, it will talk to server operating systems using WMI and PS remoting, nothing else. If you create your own gateway plugin, you might be able to smuggle that into your own extension, but not into the standard solutions. If you want to talk something else, you need a gateway plugin for your protocol and a solution that knows how to talk to that gateway plugin. But most important for today are the tools. Tools is basically everything that you see on the left, except for the first two, which is overview. We will look at that live in a second. So there are two items here at the top. Those are not tools in this parlance. Those are built-in things. This overview pane and the other one, and everything that comes below that are tools. Here we go. Overview and settings. Settings for the particular target. So, and the tools is something that you would like to, since you came to the session, to be more granular, both in terms of what tools are visible for every particular machine. For example, I absolutely might not want to have certain people be able to view certificates installed on my server, but I would want them to be able to view the event logs or something along these lines, right? And this is where the magic is supposed to happen. This is where the business logic sits for all the different parts of the server view or workstation view or cluster view in WAC. So let's see, and I warned you about the rabbit hole danger. Let's see how WAC tools work with PowerShell specifically. But maybe before we do that, let's see what a WAC extension, how the WAC extension actually looks like. I'm sorry, I'm falling back to German idioms every now and again. I don't know what it is. So here's my WAC. Yeah, and by the way, to solve the riddle about the two deployment modes, there is a gateway mode and there is that other mode. That other mode can only be installed on the workstation operating system, which means the gateway component and the web server component, they run on your machine and they run in your user context. The gateway mode means you install that on some machine and connect to that remotely, and that other machine will pass on your credentials to the monitoring targets. Or managing targets. So here I have my connections, and let me select one of the servers I've managed. So these are the tools. Yeah, I get a connection error because there is too much going on for this laptop. And I get all sorts of extensions here. If I wanted to extend my WAC further, there is an extension tool where it shows me my available extensions. It shows me the extensions that I already installed. If I happen to have a data on infrastructure, I would probably add this. There is one from Dell. There is one for Fujitsu, Lenovo, and all those other guys who invested the work in providing these extensions. And most of those vendor-specific extensions actually have all three extensibility components in them. A gateway plugin to talk to the infrastructure, a solution to tie this all together, and the tools to actually manage that. That is why we are not interested in those third-party things at the moment, because we want to manage our usual server landscape. This would be the way to go, for example, if you wanted to integrate Linux servers in WAC. So, what does an extension look like? And I will have a slide for that coming down. But the internal name for WAC is, in many instances, Server Management Experience, SME. Make a note of that. SME, we will encounter that in the course of this session multiple times. So server management experience, there are the extensions. And here is what we see if we open one, for example, let's see, Server Manager. If we go to UX, there is a bunch of JavaScript files. There is a HTML page for the index. There is an extension manifest. And then we see something about PowerShell. So there is a PowerShell module within each extension named after the extension, Microsoft SME Server Manager. And these modules usually export a whole bunch of commands. And those commands, at least with the extensions coming from Microsoft, usually are called WAC something. It's usually the exact commandlet that they're wrapping from the native PowerShell modules of that particular feature prefixed with WAC. And we will see why that is important. So this is the first dimension. This is there are PowerShell modules as part of each extension, but where is everything else? I will not bore you with searching for it, but if you look into the maybe we do. Let's just do it. This is the compressed JavaScript with all line breaks and spaces stripped from it for data volume reduction. And if I just go ahead and look for .ps1 within this thing, we see several parts like this. Yeah, I am trying. It does not, so it does not want to appearance zoom in. Here we go. That should be big enough. So, start scheduled reboot.ps1 within the JavaScript source code. And then there is a bunch of PowerShell script. If you convert the \ands back to line breaks and so on and so forth, you see a PowerShell script. Some of them are even commented. Some of them are even signed, but not the ones from Microsoft for some reason. So there is a bunch of PowerShell source code, script code, even bearing the .ps1 extension embedded into the JavaScript, and there is that PowerShell module. Why is that? What do they do? So, first off, WAC wasn't always WAC. Does anybody know the project name of WAC before it was published? Honolulu. Thanks. But the internal name is Server Management Gateway. That's where you find it in the registry. There is also Server Management Experience, because at the time, Windows Admin Center was designed, everything at Microsoft was experience. Writing a text in Word was an experience. They would find a word for that. What sort of experience that was. So, when do WAC tools run PowerShell? And I will concentrate on tools. Let's forget about gateway plugins for a second. For the rest of the presentation, let's forget about solutions. Let's concentrate on tools. When does a tool run PowerShell? A tool can run PowerShell at load time to determine whether the tools is to be displayed or not. There are three conditions that are stored in a manifest, which the tool can utilize to determine whether they are to be displayed at the particular for the particular target. One of them is local machine, so they will only be displayed if you're connecting to the gateway itself. And then there is something else. And then there is a PowerShell script. It does not return true or false, as you might have thought after this introduction. It returns a rich object, but depending on the properties of that object, WAC will decide to display or not display the tool. So this is the first dimension that we will be able to use to provide some sort of granularity. We could extend those scripts to the point that they will determine that we don't want to have to display the tools in the first place. Here it is, localhost inventory. Right, I wrote that all down for you. Inventory is basically do not display this tool if the machine does not have at least 16 gigs of RAM. Things of that nature, and script result. So, and then these tools can be embedded in the manifest, in which case they can't be signed, or even if they will be signed, the signature will be stripped at compile time, or they can point to script file, and the script file will be copied into the tool package as is, so it can remain signed, which can be significant if you run in an environment that is constrained by application control, be it a blocker or WDAC. Then, of course, the tools themselves run PowerShell scripts to onload to produce the initial view of the whatever tool the tool is doing. This is embedded in TypeScript code, which is what we saw. And those things also can be loaded from a script file and pointed to that and signed. And on user actions on the tool subpage, same methodology. In the simplest of cases, the script is embedded into the JavaScript, and depending on what the user clicks on the site, the script will run with parameters or in whichever way. So not your usual PODI-web approach, right? So this is much more involved at this stage. So how do the tools run PowerShell? And this is also important. Some tools do not run PowerShell at all. They might maybe run PowerShell for inventory, but maybe even not. So the DHCP tool, for example, does not run very much PowerShell because it talks WMI all the time. So it does run PowerShell at initialization, but for your typical DHCP operation, it will just resort to WMI. Of course, the third-party tools that just do REST API calls do not need to run PowerShell either. In most cases, PowerShell will be run remotely against the Microsoft.PowerShell endpoint, requiring local administrator rights. The connection will succeed, and if the user is not a member of local administrators, just a member of our remote management users, the connection will end gracefully or fail gracefully. And here we come to the core of the matter. WAC will also try running the connection against the SME.PowerShell endpoint. In 2018, I think, WAC introduced role-based access control for Hyper-V. And this is where it comes from. Hyper-V has one additional role, Hyper-V administrators. On the server, there is a Hyper-V administrators group, and if you put people into that group, they will be able to manage your Hyper-V, but for example, they won't be able to reboot the host. So it's slightly less privileged than the local administrator group, but not by much. And to reflect that in WAC, the WAC team went to all the length of defining this SME PowerShell endpoint and reflecting the three roles that they knew are present in Hyper-V, namely full administrator, Hyper-V administrator, and read-only user or viewer in this SME endpoint. Now, there is no configuration checking being done on the endpoint. So when WAC connects to this endpoint and the endpoint is there and the user doing the connection is permissioned to access that endpoint, WAC will assume that this configuration was created by the WAC wizard for this Hyper-V management, RBAC, and proceed accordingly. But we can do whatever we want because there is no plausibility or configuration checking being done at that point. We can introduce as many roles as we want. We can permission as many groups for that thing as we want. And we also can do things in the background, which is what I talked about last year in Prague. And by all means, look at that video. The idea was, and this is how we can introduce RBAC. We place an RBAC policy, which in my case was a SQLite database, on each managed node. We modify the PowerShell modules that are copied to I forgot that. Those PowerShell modules that you saw as the part of the extension are all copied onto each node where you enable RBAC. They are all local there because otherwise you can't provide the role definitions. The role definitions have to know, these are GIA role definitions, right? They need to know which commandlets are there and which parameters these commandlets are. So they need the modules locally. So the part of enabling RBAC, native RBAC in WAC, is copying those modules. And once the modules are copied, RBAC does not do any integrity, plausibility, or quality check on that. So you can absolutely provide your own modules if they export the same commandlets, which is what I done last year specifically for Hyper-V. And you can just look at the end of that video. And how it's done is we have an RBAC policy, a SQLite file that gets populated from the from a central database. And in that one, we have the permissions that each SID has. We allow the SME endpoint to be accessed by everyone entitled. And we evaluate the PS sender info against the RBAC policy. Anybody here who does not know how PS sender info works? Anybody here who doesn't know how GIA works within a restricted endpoint? So GIA 101 is I connect as an explicitly permissioned user. I simplify. And I can only run certain commands, but in an elevated virtual user context. So for evaluating what permissions I might have or not have on that machine, the user context, the PowerShell is starting on that machine is not enough because it's a virtual username. It has all the rights. I need to know what user initiated the session. And this information is stored in the PS sender info. And this PS sender info object is more or less identical to the Windows principal object. So it has parameters that contains the lists of SIDs of all the groups the user is a member in. So this is how you do it. If you permission a group ABC to do an operation D on this particular machine, you need the SIDs. you map the permission to the SIDs, and when the session is established, your modified commandlets will query the PS sender info variable, pull the list of SIDs and compare that against the database. It's all local. The list of SIDs comes from the logon token. It's already populated. There is no need to resolve them against AD. If you want to use group names, then of course you should take care that there are not very many groups in those tokens, because you'll have to resolve them against Active Directory. But if you're okay with providing SIDs of those groups, it's a very, very cheap operation, because the SIDs are already there. And you just look for every permission that might pertain. You just look if one of the SIDs matches, and then you allow that permission, and otherwise you do not. So, easy, right? Not really. But what would we have to do in order to take care of our wishful thinking, of our goals? Delegation. This would be provided by this approach automatically. So you could have Joe user just connecting to your endpoints and executing the commandlets that they are permitted by RBAC to execute with God rights without any additional authentication. This is achieved by moving all the logic into the SME endpoint, basically out of the box GR. Limiting visibility early. Well, a tool decides based on a PowerShell script, run on the target node, by the way, and delivering an object back to the WAC gateway. So we should be able to limit visibility, and well, providing RBAC, because that's why we're here. Connection management. This is probably not customizable. But you can use a user mode script. There is a connection management module as part of the WAC, which you would have to put on every machine, or just it's not very large. It's actually just a couple of web calls, HTTPS calls. So you could just incorporate that in your normal login script. However you manage that, but you could basically get around the limitation that all shared connections are visible to everybody by just not providing shared connections in the first place, but rather having each user look into the database, seeing for which systems they have any rights at all, and then injecting those connections as personal connections. So in the short terms, we could do whatever I did last year in Prague. So basically remove signatures from the modules provided by Microsoft extensions. Put RBAC in there. Again, look at the video. I actually lost the code by reverting my lab to an earlier snapshot. So the code only existed until I was done with the presentation last year. And after that, I just hit my revert lab script, and it reverted the lab, but the code was in that labs and it was added after the last snapshot. So that code is gone, but it's visible on the screen. How that is done, and in this manner, we would be able to do RBAC for the built-in RBACable modules, which is Hyper-V, clusters, software-defined networking, and a couple more. Basically, everything that has that PowerShell module is RBACable. Because if you copy that and if you put that into the into your GIA role definition for that SME endpoint, then it will use the locally found module and not the one present in the extension folder on the WAC gateway. In the long term, there is no way around redoing all the extensions that we want to have RBACable from scratch, introducing RBAC at the very core, and even in the HTML code, in the Angular code, because we want meaningful error messages if some features are not available due to RBAC, right? There is a software development kit published to enable people to develop their own extensions to WAC. It is there. And then the rabbit hole begins. It's all Angular. It's in a very, very bad shape as documentation goes. It's in an even worse shape as sample code goes. Basically, there is none. If you like, there is none. The SDK provides you with the Hello World extension. I have it here. If we look at the extensions, I need a server connection. So you will be able, after much fiddling around, to provide something like this. I called it RBAC feature, although it isn't. It just displays a piece of text on that right pane. So you could extend that, you could compile that, and you could inject that into RBAC. And this is a real RBAC extension. I will show you that later, because it gets worse. Even the Hello World thingy takes up almost a gigabyte of disk space. So you probably want to put these code projects into source control. You should talk to your GitLab people or your SVN people about it, because you will be putting that under stress. And in my experience so far, every package update caused like 3 digits megabyte plus on space utilization for the package project. There are some git ignore rules in there. Some of them are sensible. Some of them cause the application to not compile on a different machine after pushing that to Git and pulling it from somewhere else. So this is not very usable at the moment. It used to be usable because I did some work on that. I created some extensions that actually work. It was with Angular 7 and like packages that everybody would throw you out of the door if you even considered using them in production. Even the Hello World application that they are providing today, if you build it, it will report like 44 known vulnerabilities of high criticality. So this is not very good. Files are missing. There are at least 7 manual steps between installing the prerequisites as described in the communication, in the documentation, and actually getting the Hello World to compile. And me, not being an Angular developer, I don't know if all the edits I did to those files are good or not. They just allowed the application to compile. There is a front-end developer kit. This one is good. It's a PowerPoint slide deck with all the possible controls thrown into it. So you can just add a slide and design your application like you would do in Figma, but in PowerPoint. Why not? And to produce a Hello World, you need trial, error, and TypeScript knowledge. So in my opinion, it's a total shit show right now. It has missing dependencies. It has dependencies that are prohibited in most of organizations. Package versions are completely out of whack between the components. Example code is missing completely. Git does not forget, so you can check out in earlier commit of the sample code where there was more sample code, but that one will not compile anymore because they completely changed the whole framework behind it. And documentation is virtually non-existing, in the official explanation to why that is so is because they provide a developer guide as a WAC extension. And this has a lot of stuff that deals with Angular and graphical representation. And then there is this for PowerShell integration. Have fun with that. This is all. This is all. This is all there is at the moment in terms of development kit, SDK. Don't blame me. I have no part in that cluster. Here's the only contact channel where you have any chance of reaching that team. There are issues in GitHub on the SDK that have been open like for 3 years. Nobody's looking at that anymore. Probably they lost the password or something. Or maybe it was a test account like they always have, right? For highly critical projects. So this is where you would request that your extension is included in their standard extension feed for WAC. It is also the only email connected to WAC in any sort or manner. Providing your own extension internally, and I'm coming to an end. I know that I'm 2 minutes over time, and I'm truly sorry. The beer's on me. Providing your own extension, if you ever did a local repository for your PowerShell module, you know how to deploy NuGet packages. And the WAC extensions are not anything different. It's just NuGet packages. The packing part works very well. You are able to pack your build extension into a NuGet package, and you just throw it into file share or even a local folder on your WAC server. And this is an installable extension everybody in your organization can install for a particular WAC instance. Yeah, but again, you can try and publish that. Here are some resources that will help you. And before Rob will kill me with his cats,
I won't kill you, I'll just shout at you. Take a report.
Thank you very much.